Like Matt said, I'm from the Byron Lions Club. I took over the cabinet treasurer this last year. This is my first year at doing it, so I don't have a full year in yet. I've been with Byron Lions since 2005, so I've got 15 years. I took over the treasurer at Byron Lions in my second year and was in that position for 10 years. Um, at one of these Roar colleges, wasn't Roar College back then, it was recommended that after 10 years, it was probably a good idea to let the treasurer position roll over to someone new because it's good for others to get involved. So that was the only reason I left that position, and uh, probably won't go back to it until I leave this position because I won't be doing cabinet treasurer and club treasurer at the same time. But Matt, you want to go to the next slide? And we can go. Okay, tonight we're going to talk about the responsibilities as a treasurer that's designated in the Lions Club International Policy. Talk about some resources available to assist in that position, and leadership expectations of the position of the club. Treasurer's position is not just doing the monies and whatnot, but it's also taking leadership position with the club, leading them as to where your financial conditions are, as well as keeping them informed. And there's also some tax and nonprofit reporting that has to be done and maintained every year. Next. Go to the next slide. Okay, treasurer is responsible for financial matters pertaining, and I think probably without identifying too much, have to maintain all the financial records and accounts, but is also a member of the board of directors of the club. My experience is no one will really follow the financial records and accountants, but they'll ask a lot of questions, and responsibility of the treasurer to be able to answer those questions. Doesn't mean you have to have them at the tip of your tongue, but at least have that resource available. But also a voting member of the board of directors, so when these financial matters come up during the meetings, you can guide the club. And next. At those board of directors meetings, you have to make sure that all payments are approved by the board, recorded in the board meeting minutes. Now, there's several ways of doing that, and sometimes it's kind of a long, what I would say, future process that, paying dues and things like that are obvious, but you need to make them aware when that happens. And the bank balances and keeping up with where the finances are annually is quite important. Very similar at the club meetings, keep the members informed, be prepared with those financial informations, because in our club particularly, often at a meeting, there will be some project out there that someone wants to get involved in that hasn't been budgeted, or we don't know what the costs are, and questions with regard to these financial information may be very appropriate. Though at meetings, people don't like long, drawn out reports. They want them very concise, factual, to the point, and need to go on to the next thing. But at meetings, typically people will bring the money to pay their dues. Need to be prepared to collect that. And issuing a receipt is important, but I think if you have a track record, we generally ask all our members to pay with a check, and that check really does serve that receipt. It gives them a record. And in the 10 years I was a treasurer, I don't know that I ever gave anybody a receipt, though I did have a receipt book available if somebody did want it. You could go to the next slide. So keeping the funds in order. All the club related monies really need to pass through the treasurer. And I think one place I read that the treasurer is answers to the secretary, but the secretary and treasurer need to work together, get the information so they can send out the club dues invoice. And these are due based on the January membership. So it's a good idea to get that together very soon when you can and request people to pay those in July, August at the latest, if at all possible. I know in our club it always dragged on later, and there's people that will pay next month, but it's a good idea to get those collected as soon as you can. Organizing the funds, that's probably fairly critical in preparing the budget. In preparing that budget, you need to realize that there's the administrative budget and monies, and there's project budget and monies. The administrative monies are those the income and expenses that are from the club members. This is your dues, and if your club does a work project that is not with the public, but you might work someplace as a Lion member, but not as a income to the club from the public, that can go to the administrative. And the only thing that can be paid for your administrative expenses is those monies that you received as Lions members. The project income, that's from the public. If you have a sort of sale, Christmas tree sales, a lot of the clubs are putting up flags. Our club does that. We have income from that. That money needs to go back to the projects that benefit the public. It can't be used for the Lions membership purposes. And these need to be separated. And some clubs I know will assign, have signers for each of the accounts. I guess you need to make sure that you have that broken up. But you may or may not have two different accounts with your bank. I don't think it's necessary to do that. I never did that when I was treasurer, but I did have a separate log for the administrative income. I had a separate log for the project income, and the same thing for the expense. Now, petty cash is something that it's best if you don't have to do petty cash, but if you collect money for your meals, people will want to pay in cash, and it's a good idea to have that cash available. What I always did when I had that is I maintained a same amount of petty cash every month, and when I would deposit the money into the bank, I would always keep that amount of petty cash back, so there was never any confusion. And that petty cash wasn't administrative money; it wasn't from the project. And for reimbursement from project funds or paying out, you need to set up some sort of system. Let's go to the next slide. Receiving money and having a receipt, I guess I talked about that a little bit before. Depending on what they are, you just need to work with your club. But keeping a track record is the important thing there. You need to be able to make sure that you have some sort of validation and verification that all the payments were made or received, and people gave you money should keep track of that as well. Use checks whenever possible. Going back to what I said before, it's really important not to get confused with cash. And in my years as a treasurer for the club and actually as the cabinet treasurer, having that extra cash can be more confusing. So keeping that in separate accounts, keeping fixed amounts on it, I think is very important. Here again, in depositing that money, best to get that done as soon as you possibly can. Keep those records as soon as you possibly can get that information together, because going back and doing it later, not always as easy as it, you hoped it might be, particularly how good is your memory. The budget and maintaining and monitoring that budget throughout the year in each club meeting probably is something that is one of the leadership efforts of the treasurer. The members are not probably going to keep track of that unless each project has a manager or somebody monitoring that. They may keep track of their project, but the overall budget, the treasurer needs to stay on top of that. Setting the club dues. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide, but you need to identify what your club dues are and how much money you're going to have to take in to pay those administrative costs, because most of the monies that it's used for administration comes out of the dues, unless you have some fundraising that you might have. And you need to really review that with board of directors and club members and get that approved at the beginning of the year so everybody's on the same page. You can go to the next slide. So payments as we go through the year need to be authorized by the board of directors. If you establish a budget in the beginning of the year, which our club always did, there are certain payments that basically are ongoing payments. Now, obviously, when the dues become due, you're going to pay those, and you approve that when you approve the budget. There may be other things that are going to come on in a monthly. If you pay rent for your meeting place, you're going to get the bill for that, and you should have that in your budget, and then you just automatically pay that. Checks signed by treasurer and countersigned by a selected officer. Some clubs require 2 signatures. I think as I receive the dues from the various treasurers in the district, I don't think too many of our clubs require more than 1 signature on the check. I know there are a couple that do, and I think that several of our clubs keep separate, actually different accounts, one for the administrative and one for the project. And I believe the same officer handles those in most cases, so maybe your club might want to do that a little different. All payments purchased by the club as well as dues district and international, really need to keep track of those. On to the next. So, particular club obligations. Annual dues are billed biannually based on the number of members on July 1st and January 1st. The July 1st billing for dues will be based on the number of members on July 1. And that may not be the number of members that the club thinks they have. That's going to be the number of members that are registered at international and what's on that list. Our district gets an invoice from the multi-district based on the number of members in our district. And the number of members in our district is based on the total of all the club's members. So if you have members that are going to drop, make sure that gets reported before July 1st or gets reported before January 1st, because you will be invoiced for those. Now, the international dues will be invoiced directly from LCI. Now, that's $21.50 per member, billed in July and in January. So for your budget, you need to budget that $43 per member per year. Now, that's for this year. That was last year, and that's for the next year. I've heard some rumors that may change, so don't take this number and advance it on to future years until you know for sure where we are with that. Oops, what happened? We jumped the slide. You want to go back, Matt? Okay, there. The multiple district and our district dues will be on the same invoice, and that'll come from the cabinet treasurer. Now, those are $9.28 per member, billed in July and January. So your budget has to cover $18.50 per member for the year. And here again, remember the number of members you have. In July, there will also be an invoice for bond and insurance for each club. And if you have a Leo's club, you have to include that. So if you total all those numbers up, that's the minimum that your dues are going to have to cover. And then any other expenses you have that are going to be in more administrative, your club meeting expenses, anything that you might do for your club. If you send members to multi-district meetings or zone meetings or international meetings or anything like that, that the the club is actually going to pay for, you have to make sure that those are covered in your budget, because that has to come out of your administrative fee, and the club's going to be responsible for that. You can't use project funds. So we can go to the next slide. So maintaining these general records of receipts and disbursements, obviously you're going to get your bank statements, reconcile those on a monthly basis with your income and expenses. You're going to have item-based statement of credits and charges and whatnot. You really need to use some sort of ledger book or computer spreadsheet. Personally, I use Quicken. I like Quicken. I've been using it for a long time for my personal things. As a treasurer at Byron, I use Quicken always. One of the problems with Quicken is there's a cost for it. I have a personal Quicken program, so I don't charge anybody or haven't charged anybody, but your club is going to be the sole use of that Quicken. There is an annual fee with Quicken now, and I don't know if that's something your club will pay. Excel is also a very good method of putting your information together. The one concern that I have used in Excel is if you ever modify your spreadsheet or add lines or columns or whatever, and then have calculations that are based on other things, you got to make sure that you make corrections and get that covered. There's other ledger books or spreadsheets out there. I'm not familiar with a lot of them. Even just a handwritten ledger book, just so you can identify what's in those and what you need. I suggest keeping a separate record of dues paid. If that gets buried in your ledger book, sometimes it's hard to keep track of who's paid and who hasn't paid. One of the difficulties with however members you have, if you got 20 members, 30 members, 50 members, it's pretty easy for somebody to get lost that maybe hasn't paid. And to be honest with you, sometimes people forget if they paid or didn't pay, and they come back and ask, did I pay or didn't I pay? So it's nice to be able to look that up and keep that as a separate ledger or a separate record. Best way to keep that all in order is do everything as quick as you can. For the club, should really submit monthly and semi-annual financial statements. I know our club doesn't necessarily do an update every month or two as to where we are with the budget, but sometimes it may not be a bad idea to do that as well. You have to report to the club some way each month as to what your treasurer's report, what your expenditures are and whatnot. I think most members like to see where the money's been spent on a monthly basis. I think with most clubs, there's a few people that are very concerned about it, and there's also a few members that really aren't that concerned as long as you are within the budget. Next slide. Go to the next slide. Okay, at the end of the treasurer's term, the treasurer's term is for 1 year. I think many clubs will reelect its treasurer for several years, and that's probably a good thing because of the learning curve. But at the end of the term, whenever one goes out of the office, you really need to put all the information together, all the documentation, and put it in order for the next treasurer. All the bank transactions should be reconciled. There should be a balance of income and expenditures. The budget as approved in the beginning of the year, the budget as spent at the end of the year, probably important. And by the bylaws, there's a statement that says you should give bond for the faithful discharge of your position. I don't know that anybody's ever put up a bond for that, but I guess, it's in good faith that you know that we need to have everything in order when the transaction happens. The year-end statements really need to be closed out and turned over to the new treasurer at the end of the year, which really should be done by the end of July if you can all do it. Sometimes there may be some billings and payments that come in after the first, but and even if you don't change treasurers, individually, one really needs to do that. Audit. Books should be audited at the end of the year. It's a good record keeping for protection of the treasurer. It's good for the club. It's a good review. Probably the best way to have an audit is have two or three prior club officers or those who are interested in what the finance is and just review the process that was used in putting together the ledgers and how payments were made and whatnot. And I think at the end of the year, that gives the club a good, comfortable feeling of treasurer's actions and also leaves the treasurer with a good feeling he's done the job the way the club expected it to. Next slide. Here again, just reiterate, closing everything out, list what may be available there and all the income expense statements. Next. So treasurer's leader, at most board meetings that I've attended, um, everyone will ask the treasurer, how do we stand with our dollars? So what do we need to do for this? What are the rules on spending monies and whatnot? So treasurer needs to be a leader at the board meeting as well as at the club meeting. There are some online resources available, leadership courses. LCI has some pretty good courses that you can take online. Later slide, we have another list of those that are available. And really need to make sure you follow the Lions Code of Ethics. There's, a few things that realistically, as a treasurer, you need to keep in track of. So, next slide. So taxes, it's often misunderstood what our club is in terms when we're newly chartered. Lions clubs are a 501c4 organization, which means that we don't necessarily qualify. Service clubs don't qualify um, as deductible for donors to contribute. We are classified as a nonprofit, um, and there really isn't the tax breaks that are there for the 501c3, which are classified as a charity. And some of the clubs in our district are 501c3s, and those of you that are that, I guess, need to know that. And those donations are tax deductible for the donors. Taxes and filings are a little bit more complicated. I'm not going to go into detail on those because honestly, I haven't been involved with this, so I haven't seen the reporting that needs to be done for those. Several years ago, our club had received some donations because of a situation we had. And those donations were of significant amount. And I went to the IRS and talked to them and say, hey, do I need to send out letters to these donors because they need to get a letter so they can deduct it on income tax? And believe it or not, a friendly person at the IRS kind of set me straight and says, well, are you a 501c4 or are you a 501c3? Well, I was told that 501c4, those people couldn't deduct that from their income tax. So I didn't need to send letters out or didn't send letters to those people. If we had been a 501c3, we would have been under a different set of rules. All clubs must file a federal tax form at $990 each year. And if you are under $50,000 in earnings, you can do that with the 990N, which is an e-postcard that can be done online and very quickly. It takes about 5 minutes. You basically sign up and register your club and I guess verify that you were under the $50,000. Requirements on 501c status will vary if you're a 501c3. I'll go to the next one. So for the state of Minnesota, clubs must renew their nonprofit status with the Secretary of State. Now, in our club, I believe our secretary does that. I did not file the nonprofit status, which I think is also identifies us as limited liability. And you really need to make sure that gets done every year, or someone in the club needs to do that every year. As a treasurer, probably good to talk with the secretary and make sure that someone's doing it. On the next couple of slides, we'll give you a little bit of what you might see with that. So if you go to the next one, next slide there. This is an email that was received from the Secretary of State. You can see the date on it. It goes back to 2015. It was for the district. And there is a link on that email. It's probably best not to wait until you get an email from the Secretary of the State. The annual review renewal is due on December 31st of the year. So this year, before December 31st, 2020, your club needs to file that renewal. And if you get the email, there is a link there. If you want to go online, go to the next slide, Matt. There is a website down on the bottom. If you copy that into your address line, it'll take you to that Secretary of State website, and it will give you one of these forms. You can click on your business name or filing number and get the information you need to file that. Go to the next slide. If you don't remember your file number, which probably, unless you got it written down someplace, you won't, you can click on the business name. Now this example in the slide here is showing the file number, but I clicked in the business name, typed in Byron Lyons, and it did a search and came up with the Byron Lyons. There's also a schedule there as to what the costs are for filing a new business or a nonprofit. And since clubs have probably already filed for that, there is no charge for renewal. So when you click on the search in this column, you'll see what's on the next slide if you want to go there, Matt. And you will get this information. And my screen got blocked out here to see what's on the right side, but there's a detail box over there. You click on that detail, and you can go to the next slide there, Matt. And it will give you the information of your club. Now, as we said, this was in 2015. It had Stan 2000. Oh, I'm butchering his name there, but anyway, it identifies who the president is, or your club president, or the because this is for the district. This had the governor. Had the address for the club, status as where our jurisdiction, filing status, or number, and all that information. And you can also click down below. There's filing history and renewal history. And you click on those tabs, it'll give you the information you need. So go ahead and go to the next. Now, this is just the schedule identifying the costs. The annual renewal cost for nonprofit is 0. So if your club is already established, you go through the process. You won't have to pay anything, just get it filed. Okay, next slide. So resources that are available. Other club members, past treasurers, club officers are always good members to ask questions. Be careful, and I don't want to belittle anybody here, but often those that were treasurers or club members a long time ago, the rules may have changed or things may be done a little bit different this year than they were last year. So all advice is good advice, but I would also recommend going onto the international website and look at some of the guidelines there and look at these international resources that are available. And there are good ones out there. It might take a little time to read some of them, but they're all good. And I think when I first came on as treasurer back in 2005, I didn't know that much about Lions. I didn't know that much about being a treasurer, and I did a lot of reading on the website and learned a lot about the Lions and a lot about some of the Constitution and bylaws and practices. And there's other online training webinars out there that just a general leadership. One other thing about online is paying bills online via My LIC is probably a good way to go, particularly for your international dues. It's pretty easy to set up a electronic payment with the bank, and then you just do the mailing and send that check. So if we can go to the next slide and basically close out reviewing what we said we would talk about, the responsibilities of the club, treasurer, resources available, leadership expectations, and tax and nonprofit, as well as directions and everyone's responsibilities. So with that, I guess we'll open up for questions. If anybody has anything wants to explain or to go into more detail, I'd be happy to respond. Speak up if you have any questions. I guess I'm not sure who all we may have with regard